Alright, this is John Cole with okraw.com. Today we have another exciting episode for you. In this episode, actually, it's going to be quite fun because we will be going over a recent published scientific study on raw vegans. Yes, this published study compared omnivores to vegans to raw vegans in their nutritional status and in blood testing, and hopefully soon they'll also reveal some metabolite testing in the urine, which I'm actually quite curious to see. As you guys know, I've been doing a raw foods diet now for the last 27 years, although within the last few years I started introducing more heat processed foods into my diet to take my raw foods diet to the next level. I'm not going to discuss that in this episode, but check the link down below in the description where I have a whole detailed video on why I started introducing small amounts of heat processed foods that's heat processed in certain ways and only specific foods into my raw vegan diet. So the title of this published study is Nutritional Intact and Biomarker Status in Strict Raw Food Eaters. And it actually comes out of Germany. So I'm glad Germany is stepping up and doing some work to find out if raw vegans can be healthy or not, and the health implications and the things that are better actually about raw vegans. And you know, here's a summary I'll tell you guys if you guys don't want to watch the whole video, right? In some ways, a raw vegan diet is superior to other diet styles. That being said, in some ways a raw vegan diet can fall short in some areas and not be as good as other diet styles. So what this depends on is specifically what is the diet that you are classifying made up of specifically. You could eat a very high fruit raw vegan diet that in my opinion is not that healthy, but you could eat a really good vegan, even if you eat heat processed foods diet with lots of vegetables, lots of fruits, and other smaller amounts of heat processed foods, hopefully no processed foods, and have a pretty good diet. And even in this study, the omnivores in some categories were actually better off than raw vegans. That being said, this is a very interesting study, so I'd encourage you guys to watch this to learn from, you know, my experiences kind of mixed in with the study. So I'm interpreting the study not only on what the study says, but also based on my experiences. So some of the things that they say in this study, I found based on my experiences to be true. So that's quite interesting. And the other thing I would encourage you guys to do is to, you know, guys, if you guys are watching videos on YouTube for raw vegan knowledge, right, please gravitate towards people that have been doing it for longer amounts of time, that have been successful on a raw vegan diet. I'm glad that there's so many YouTubers doing raw vegan videos to create awareness about being raw vegan, but I'm saddened by the fact that a lot of the people doing YouTube videos maybe eat a more higher fruit diet that, in my opinion, and also based on the science, is not going to be super healthy in the long run, and you may have some challenges with it depending on how you specifically are implementing your diet. That is the exact reason why I make my videos. I'm probably one of the longest term raw vegans on YouTube that make constant videos that incorporate the science into his videos, as well as sharing my valuable experience. So if you're not already subscribed, make sure you smash that subscribe button right down below, and make sure you click the bell notification so you get notified as many videos come out. And finally, be sure to check my past episodes. I have over 600 episodes on this channel dedicated to teach you guys how to elevate and take your raw vegan diet to the next level so that you can be healthy and sustainable in the long run. Alright, so let's get into this study and the abstract. I'll summarize some parts of it. Following a strict raw food diet primarily based on fresh fruit and raw vegetables, waiving any consumption of heat or processed food has the risk of undersupply of energy and certain macro and micronutrients. In this cross-sectional study, we compared 16 non-smoking strict raw food eaters with the non-smoking participants, 32 vegan and 27 omnivores. And to go down to some of the summary that I'll be sharing with you guys, basically the raw food eaters had lower mean value of BMI and percentage of body fat than the respective, vegan and omnivore participants. But in addition, the same holds true of energy supply and intake of protein, carbohydrates, calcium, and iodine were lower in the raw vegan. So that's some of the challenges a raw vegan can have depending on what you specifically you're eating. And it says serum levels revealed lower levels of HDL, cholesterol, triglycerides, zinc, and vitamin D3. In some cases, low levels could be good. In other cases, low levels can really not be good. So, this literally shows the benefit, but also the potential hazards and pitfalls of a raw vegan diet. The reason why I'm making this video for you guys is that if you guys are on a raw vegan diet, I want you guys to, fill in to ensure that you are not going to be one of the statistics, because over the long run, those statistics and those lower numbers will bite you in the ass, because your outcomes will not be as good as somebody, that are getting their more nutritional needs met. Now, the other thing I will say is that this study is based on blood testing only. So if you value blood testing as the most important method of, your health, then you definitely want to listen to this. I know a lot of raw vegans think, blood testing is bogus. You could think that if you want. I think blood testing should be a part, and you should take that into consideration on your raw vegan diet. I also think many other testing data can be valuable, such as microbiome testing, which I've recently done. I think that can be even more important, especially if you are really into your raw vegan diet for your health and for longevity. In addition, there's other things that are important factors to test, like vibrancy and biophotons, and I don't know how you would test those in a person, or actually carotenoid levels, which are not tested necessarily in these testing as well, because there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes that science cannot yet identify. So I'll just say that's my 2 cents addition. All right, let's go ahead and get into the introduction. I'm just going to read some of this off for you. And in the introduction it says, thorough processing, or cooking your food, has been carried out since humankind has learned to master fire for cooking purposes approximately 700,000 years ago. The benefits of this processing especially include inactivation of foodborne pathogens, destruction of natural toxins, prolongation of shelf life, improved digestibility and bioavailability of nutrients, improved palatability, taste, texture, and flavor, as well as enhanced functional properties. So, I am a raw vegan personally that believes that in some ways heat processing your food can be beneficial, but in many ways it's not good. Whereas in many cases, a lot of raw foodists believe that cooking your food is all bad, there's never an exception, it's always going to be worse if you cook your food. And very few things in life are all right or all wrong. There's always a shades of gray. So I want you guys to use your brain a little bit instead of just being a follower and a sheeple and following the raw food dogma, if health is important to you. If it's not important to you and you just life is about living through dogmatic expression, live how you want, all right? I'm in this for my health, longevity, and immune system building, since I almost lost my life when I was younger. All right, moving on in the introduction, reading off the paper here. However, thermal processing can result in undesired consequences such as loss of certain nutrients or the generation of compounds with negative effects. Furthermore, toxic compounds may be formed during heating depending on the process temperature, especially through the Maillard reaction. Yeah, you could create all kinds of different toxins, including cross-linking, AGEs, and acrylamides for sure. So then basically it says that to strictly avoid the consumption of these undesired compounds, consumers would have to strictly refrain from heating food, eating raw food only, i.e. vegetables, fruits, or grains as harvested, but also animal products like raw eggs, raw meat, or raw fish would be possible to consume. Such a diet is expected to be very inconvenient for most people and might be expected to result in nutritional undersupply, as things like bread, potatoes, most dairy products have to be excluded from the diet. As a consequence, the intake of energy or vitamin B12 may be inadequate in the case of missing or only low consumption of raw animal products, as already reported for a study in Germany in the 1990s. So I will say that a raw diet can be very restrictive. Link down below to my video on raw vegan diet being restrictive and how to unrestrict your raw vegan diet if that is important to you. my personal belief after 27 years of being on a raw vegan diet is that it's very important to include a wide variety and diversity of foods you can eat raw, and even include some heat processed ones, that minimize the potential damage to the food you're eating, so you don't get the negative consequences of eating heat processed foods. And this is totally possible in my opinion, and that's what I do and how I live myself. So a lot of these pages are just a lot of information that I'm really not going to go over. It goes over blood samples, dietary assessments, statistics, results, and I'm just going to basically go over some of the different charts and data, because in the results they explain what I'm going to be explaining in the charts and data. Talks about dietary intake. They go over the individual characteristics of the 16 raw food eaters. Now, please mind you, this is not raw vegan food eaters. Some of these people were raw vegan, but many of them were raw food eaters that may include some meat, although they had like a washout period. In the washout period, I don't think they really ate a lot of meat. And they did the test for basically a 3-day dietary analysis. They provided the participants scales to weigh out their food so they'd know exactly what they eat. And that's in this table number 1. All right, next on to table number 2, that's more interesting to me. This is the characteristics of study population, women and men of raw food eaters, the vegan and omnivore eaters. So they separated women to men. I'm pretty much just going to cover the men. The women are kind of on their own thing. They necessarily weren't doing raw food diet for as long as the men, and based on their dietary food log, which I saw, like, it looks like they're just massively under eating, and it was very interesting how they were eating. So that could be helpful for raw food women eaters that may eat a little bit differently than men. But the men, the mean number of years they were doing it were 15 years. So these are more long-term raw food eaters. Their average, or the mean age, was 44. The BMI was 20.7, and we'll pop this chart up on the screen here for you guys. And check it out, the BMI of the raw food eaters was 20.7. For vegans, it was 24.5, and for omnivores, it was 24.4. So this means that, in general, raw food eaters have a lower BMI, which means they're going to be, skinnier. I wouldn't say that's necessarily healthy. You want to look at the average health. Definitely raw food eaters should be on the lower end of the BMI, because it can be more challenging to get calories. So I believe this to be true. The next was the waist size. So the waist size, and this is in centimeters, was, I'm talking all the means, just the results on the study. 76 centimeters. For the vegan men, it was 86.3, and for the omnivores, it was 86.8. So definitely they're skinnier. The weight was, I would say this is a kind of approaching the underweight amount, because the weight for raw food eaters was 65 kilograms. For the vegan men, it was 81.9. For the omnivore, it was 81.1. So that's a significant difference in the weight. The raw food eaters were definitely less weight. And you could argue, you want to have the appropriate amount of weight on you. Not too much, not too little. And then the percent body fat, this is where the raw vegans really kick ass and kind of approach like athletic body fat percentages. So for example, the omnivore men had 20.8% body fat. The vegan men also had 20.8, but the raw food eaters had 13.9. So, they had less body fat on them, which is good. I think 20% body fat, I think that's maybe what a woman should be at. I don't know. Let's see. And then this is the fun part. Muscle percentage as total body weight. So raw vegans also kicked butt on muscle percent of total body weight. Raw vegans were 39.8% muscle, whereas the vegan men were 37.4 and the omnivore men were 37.2. Then they go into blood pressure, which we're not really going to cover. In general, the raw food eaters were lower. And then the supplementation on the raw food eaters, right? This is a very interesting part. On the omnivorous eaters, like out of 13 omnivorous eaters, 4 people supplemented. And for the vegans, out of 14 sample size, 14 or 100% supplemented. So I give kudos to the vegan men there in Germany that supplemented. But on the raw food eaters, only 7 of them supplemented, which is 64% out of the 11. So they were not all supplementing. And the question is, are they supplementing appropriately? Because a vegan, raw vegan, and even an omnivorous diet can be deficient in certain nutrients depending on the specific foods you're choosing to eat. And they may end up biting you in the butt. All right, let's get down to the literally meat of this study, which are this figure here, which is the table number 3, laboratory blood and serum parameters of women and men, of raw food eaters, of vegans, and omnivores. So once again, I'm only going to go over the men data. You guys could link down below to the study if you guys want to see the women data, which is interesting. Anyways, we're going to put up on the screen the men data, and I've highlighted some of the different components that are interesting to me. All right, so first I want to go over some of the different parameters of the blood, which is like the blood cell. And I just really want to highlight this one called the leukocytes. So one of the reasons why I got into raw foods is because one of the things that is said by raw foodists is that, you know, when you eat cooked food, you get digestive leukocytosis, which means you get a flood of white blood cells in your blood, which means, you know, that cooked food is a foreign object and it's activating our immune system. And way back in the day when I first learned about raw foods, I believed this, and because I had immune challenges that I wanted to overcome, I did not want to do the boy who cried wolf on my immune system every single time I ate food. And so leukocytosis was something I wanted to avoid. Since that time, I learned that leukocytosis only occurs when you eat animal foods that have the foreign proteins, not even when you eat the junkiest vegan foods. So let's put that to the test in this blood analysis. Let's check it out. So, okay, going over the omnivores, what were their leukocytes in their blood? 4.7, right? Whoa, that's kind of high. The vegan men, 4.6, so we're moving in the right direction because you want to have maybe a lower number of leukocytes because maybe a higher number means potential infection. And of course, I'm just a layman, I'm not a doctor or anything. So please consult a doctor if you want what all this really means. But if we go over to the raw food eaters, they had 5.0. So technically, you know, they had higher leukocytes in their blood, which would be counter or exactly opposite of what you would think if they're raw food eaters, because, right, when you cook your food, you cause leukocytosis, but here clearly the vegans that eat heat processed foods and the omnivores eating whatever had lower leukocytes in their blood. So that's actually quite interesting to me. Next, now this checks blood markers, not necessarily what you're consuming. So the protein total in their blood for raw food was 7.5, whereas the vegans were 6.8 and the omnivores were 7.0. So in their blood only, they had enough protein. Interesting is CRP, or C-reactive protein. That's a sign of inflammation in the body. Definitely the raw food eaters did better than the other categories. They had 0.3, so that's lower than the vegans at 0.79 and lower than the omnivores at 0.63. So next we want to talk about the HbA1c, which is like your long-term glucose reading on average. And for the raw food eaters, it was 5.1. But also for the vegans, it was 5.1, and the omnivores were 5.2. So they all fairly had a similar kind of blood sugar control. And let's see, the other ones that were interesting for me was TSH, so thyroid hormone. And the omnivores were 2.42, the vegans were 2.3, and the raw foodists were 1.42. So once again, a lot of the blood markers, you want to have it in the range. You don't want to have it too low, that could not be good. You don't want to have it too high, you want it right in the sweet spot, and they're not given the exact range of what it should be, but it definitely was lower, which could be a good or bad thing. I know personally, when I went and got standard traditional blood tests, and the standard doctor looked at my thyroid hormones, he's like, whoa, you're low in your hormones. So I think this can be a thing that goes along with being a raw vegan, which, you know, may or may not be good or bad depending on your specific numbers, so you might want to check it out. Ferritin, which is like your iron in the blood. The omnivores were 121, the vegans were 81, and the raw food was 110. So that's definitely more than the vegans, but not as much as the omnivores. Cholesterol, that was quite interesting. So the omnivores were 195. That's actually getting quite high. The vegan men were pretty good at 156, but the raw food eaters were 131. And then going over LDL, HDL, and triglycerides, the raw food eaters had less of all three of those compared to the other groups. Now here's where it gets interesting. The vitamin B12. Do the raw food eaters have more B12 because they're eating their produce unwashed and we get B12 on our food and our body makes our own, if you want to believe that? I'm not saying that's true or not, but based on this study, the omnivores, B12 levels were 431, right? The vegans, once again with 100% supplementation compliance, and I would believe that they are supplementing B12, had 673. But then the raw food eaters had only 290, and that's actually like deficient. And I think there's only a small percentage that supplemented, and maybe they didn't supplement regularly. So that's really not good for your long-term health to have low B12. When your B12 is low, then guess what? Your homocysteine is going to be high, and this is definitely not good. So the homocysteine of the omnivores was 9.8, maybe a little bit high. The vegan men were 8.3. That's a pretty good solid number. But then what were the raw food eaters? Were they better than the omnivores? No, they came out worse. They were 12.2 on their homocysteine. So guys, if you guys are on any style diet, whether you're vegan, raw vegan, or even omnivorous, take your B12. I recommend it. You know, it's a water-soluble nutrient. But make sure you take it regularly, because for many years I irregularly supplemented, and guess what? My vitamin B12 was always a little bit low or low in range, and my homocysteine has always been a little bit high or, you know, in range and on the high side. So it basically says what I've experienced myself. So learn from this study and my mistakes. Take your B12 supplement, guys. Super important. The other thing that was quite interesting to me was that the calcium in the blood, okay, this is calcium in the blood, for the omnivores were 2.39, the vegan men were 2.36, and the raw food eaters were 2.40. So according to the blood test, the calcium was in line. But what was not in line was the zinc. The zinc in omnivores were 84, the zinc in the vegan men was 77, and the zinc in the raw food eaters was 71. So that was the lowest. So it's definitely interesting looking at other raw vegans' blood work that's published in a study, so it has to be true, right? All right, the final nutrient I want to go over is vitamin D3. Okay, so the omnivores, what was their D3 score? 41.4. All right, I mean, that seems kind of low to me. The vegan men, what was their vitamin D, right? 68.6. That seems like a nice solid number there. And how did the raw food eaters do? Did the raw food eaters get a lot of vitamin D from the food they're eating, or maybe from the sun, like get it naturally? No, their vitamin D was the lowest of all the categories. They had 37.0 on the vitamin D, which was lower than the omnivores, and even the vegan men beat their butts. Once again, the vegan men were supplementing, and I would highly believe that the vegan men were supplementing at least B12 and vitamin D, which are two common nutrients that may be deficient on a vegan diet, or actually any diet for that matter, especially if you're up in Germany and it's the winter time when you're getting the test and you're not getting enough sun because you're inside too much. All right. So what did we learn from the blood tests of omnivores, raw vegans, and vegans? Well, we learned a few things. You know, your protein in your blood could be quite adequate. You know, the leukocytosis, that was quite interesting. The leukocytes were higher in the raw food eaters, so, you know, I personally do not believe that, you know, eating cooked foods causes leukocytosis if you're eating cooked plant foods, because the leukocytes were higher in the raw food eaters, which goes exactly against some of the dogma that is out there. So, you know, I want you guys to use your brains to think. Other things, of course, the cholesterol and LDL and HDL and triglycerides were all lower, so that could be good because heart disease is one of the major killers on the planet, and I think everybody should get their cholesterol lower, including the omnivores in this study. B12 is a nutrient of concern, right? The B12, the raw food eaters had the lowest B12. The omnivores also had low B12, in my opinion, 431, whereas the vegan men dominated at 673 because they are supplementing. So no matter what diet you guys are on, I would recommend supplementing B12. Of course, connect with your doctor to see if that's what they recommend as well. Homocysteine was the highest in the raw food eaters. That makes me sad. Once again, it's directly with some other factors having to do with the lower B12 status causes the high homocysteine. Not good for cardiovascular health. The D3 also lowest in the raw vegans. You would think, oh, raw vegans, they love the sun, they want to get vitamin D naturally, but they were the lowest because they're probably not supplement compliers. You know, I supplement vitamin B12 and vitamin D on a daily basis now myself. I take a product called Complement, which is not sponsored. I had to buy it myself. And then, of course, the zinc, another common nutrient that I've talked about many times on a raw vegan diet. Even a vegan diet can be deficient if you're not paying attention to your nut and seed intake, which is where you're going to probably get most of the zinc from. So yeah, that could be quite important too. So there's things you could do to compensate for the low numbers you may have, you know, and that's what I want you guys to do, all right? So moving on, the study, they go over all this summary. Oh, and let's go over the conclusions in the study before we go over the supplementary data. So let's go over the conclusions of the study. Our investigations allow the consideration of consequences of a strict raw food diet. So yeah, they talk about the consequences. There were also benefits that maybe they don't cover as much. But in any case, they say, as is already well known, an insufficient supply of vitamin B12 is expected to be the main harm in the case of raw vegan diet. Without or insufficient supplementation, and in the case of raw vegetarian or mixed diet with insufficient consumption of foods of animal origin. So yeah, some of the raw food eaters ate some animals. Anyways, I would not eat animals to get B12. I would just take a B12 supplement personally. And it says this was quantifiable in homocysteine levels above 12 UMol per liter observed in 50% of the participants. The deficiency could be easily avoided by vitamin B12 supplementation, as demonstrated by the vegans in the study, with a supplementation rate of 94% and an elevated homocysteine levels of 6%. A second important issue is the difficulty to ensure an adequate supply of energy in a raw food diet. This becomes evident by the low BMI observed. To reach an adequate energy supply, the limited choices of food groups available require the consumption of higher amounts of certain food, like a lot of fruits, for example, or nuts to get your calories from. The long-term consequences of this quantifiably and in part quantitatively reduced food supply have to be investigated in more detail. So basically, that's what they say. What I'm going to tell you guys is this. I encourage you guys to expand the diet and the varieties of raw foods you eat. While many raw foodists believe you could eat, you know, fruits for your calories or nuts for your calories. Vegetables are hard to get calories from. That can be true. You could also get your calories from sprouted beans and grains on a raw vegan diet. If you want to sprout certain beans, you could do that. Many grains could also be sprouted. Quinoa, millet, buckwheat, wheat. Include those in your diet as well in smaller proportions. Most people on a raw vegan diet don't just exclude those foods in general. If you don't mind adding some heat processed foods like I do now, it makes it significantly easier to spread your caloric intake to get calories from foods other than fruit. You know, my goal these days is to get enough fruit in me, but more importantly, not overeat fruit at the expense of not eating something else. You know, I'll even steam some purple sweet potatoes and some eggplant and whatnot to get some extra calories in me. these days. I also will eat, steamed beans. Like today I had like French lentils, and I had purple rice, and also millet mixed in my bean mix that was cooked in mushroom, like broth, and watermelon juice, which is quite interesting, and onions. So yeah, I just eat like a small portion of that to like just get more of a diversity of fiber and phytonutrients, and just different mixtures of food without eating additional fruit. I believe this to be healthier than overeating and eating way more fruit to get your calories from. And to me, that's what this study is kind of telling me. Like, if you read between the lines, that they're saying, hey, if you eat so much of one food, you may have some challenges with nutrients. And they don't even discuss fiber because this is not a microbiome test, right? So that's what I'm going to tell you guys. I mean, that's why I teach what I teach, because I not only take my experiences that I've experienced over 27 years of being raw vegan, seeing many other people do it, some succeed, but most fail over my 27 years, and now they're just no longer raw food vegans because it failed and they just went back to eating garbage and crap, and I don't want that to happen to you. That's why I make videos covering the science. And this science is like newly released, so you're probably not going to see this on any other channel because I keep up with the data coming out, and this was published on April 21st, 2022, like literally just a few months ago. All right, so now this is not part of the original study, but if you look hard online, you can find a supplementary addendum to the study, which is actually kind of, to me, more interesting than just the study alone, because pretty much the stuff in the study I already kind of knew, and that's already what I've been teaching you, but now I have like a proof that what I'm teaching you guys is true pretty much, all right? So the supplemental was 2 pages, and on 1 page it goes over intake of selected food groups, which is quite interesting because it reveals what the raw food eaters ate, and this is how they got the results they got, and this is on a 3-day weighted food records, right? And this other table shows the nutrient intake based on 3-day weighted food records in women and men. And in many ways, the raw food eaters kicked butt on food intake for nutrients compared to the omnivores and the vegans. Although in some cases, the omnivores actually had some better numbers than the raw food eaters themselves. So once again, if you design your raw food diet to kick ass over other style eaters, you could totally do that, but now you have to pay more attention to the specific foods you eat and not just overconsume too many fruits. Otherwise, your consumption, will look like the numbers here, and we're going to go over next what the raw food eaters ate to get these numbers, because we have a good general idea of it on the back. And this is the part I was geeking out on a little bit, actually, guys. So let's go over this table. Once again, pop it up on the screen there. The overall energy, I think that's like calories or whatever. I don't know the measurement because it's in Europe. But basically, the raw food eaters had less energy density, or maybe you could say calories, 9.6 compared to the vegans had 10.7, and the omnivores had 10.2. So, that's one of the reasons why they're underweight, because they're just literally not getting as much energy into them. The cool thing is the raw food eaters kick butt on the fiber. Look at this. The raw food eaters had 62 grams of fiber. I think that should actually be higher personally. But the vegan men only had 52, so that's, pretty good. But the omnivores only had 26 grams of fiber, probably because they're eating, animal products and don't have no fiber in it. Doesn't have any fiber in processed foods. They process the fiber out. The protein consumption was quite interesting. So this is protein that they're eating. The protein in their blood, seemed to be good. But the protein that they're eating, based on the food records, the omnivores had 106, so that was the most protein. The vegan men had 94, but the raw food eaters had only 79. So, and that's in grams, and that's quite low. And some ways to increase the protein, because I see what they're eating. I mean, the number one way to me to do it would be to eat high protein foods low on the food chain, such as eating more leafy green vegetables and algae, if you guys want to increase your protein easily without having to eat massive volumes of food. Eat dehydrated greens if you guys want to do that. I like to juice my greens so I can get higher quantities of greens in me that have higher levels of protein without stuffing my body full of a lot of extra fiber, right? but do what you see fit. Carbohydrates, right? How many carbs were the omnivores getting, right? They got 231 carbs. The vegan men had 351, and the raw food eaters had 210. So actually they were actually the lowest carbohydrate. So that's quite interesting. And then the saccharose, which is I would call it the sugar, that's where it gets interesting. The omnivores had 35 grams. The vegan men had 59, but this is where the raw food diet, I believe, can get you into some trouble. 77. So they're really pushing the limit, maybe even exceeding the limit on the amount of sugar that they have to process and consume to meet their caloric, needs. Because, you've limited your food groups, so they're eating lots more sugar. The effects of long-term sugar over time could be challenging on your body. We could process sugar, of course, but we want to, once again, keep in that sweet spot range. Look at the link down below, the video I just posted last week on, how water fasting, exercise, and yes, even fruit can kill you, right? And this is proven in another study that shows the maximum amount of fruit that you may want to eat in a day for long-term mortality. Next, going into fat consumption, and this is once again quite interesting. Okay, so the vegan men had 95 grams of fat in their diet a day, which is, seems pretty good. You don't want to eat a lot of fat. You don't want to get too little either. The omnivores had 129, which was the highest, and the raw food eaters fell right in between the vegan men and the omnivores at 116 grams a day. Then we could get into different nutrients, and this is quite fun. The retinol, I guess that'd be like the vitamin A, and the omnivores had 1340. The vegan men had 1204, and the raw food eaters kicked their ass at 3849. So this is great. The vitamin B12, which is next, not so good. The omnivore is actually on intake of vitamin B12 on these 3 days, once again, 7.72. So they actually had more vitamin B12 intake than the vegans that had 0.48, and somehow the raw vegans actually had 1.78 on the 3-day weighted food records. Once again, in the blood test is long-term, and this is just on a 3-day weighted. So a little bit different, guys. So don't just, their B12 is fine. No, long-term in the blood was bad. Okay, vitamin D and their vitamin D consumption, once again, it's interesting as well. The raw food eaters had 6.03 of the vitamin D. The vegans had 0.87, and the omnivores was 3.05. So the question to me is, what were the raw food eaters doing to really inflate their B12 and D for these tests, but then it wasn't necessarily in their blood? Were they eating special on the 3 days that they did these weighted tests to show better results than what their blood markers would? I mean, that'd be my, what I would think. Folic acid's quite important, and that's the folic acid in the blood. I would probably say that should be called folate, because folate and folic acid are not the same thing. Anyways, the omnivores are 326, the vegans were 473, and the raw food eaters kicked ass at 553 for the folic acid, commonly in leafy green vegetables. B vitamin B1, once again, raw food eaters kick butt, 1.89 compared to vegan men, 1.77, and omnivores at 1.54. Vitamin B2, once again, 1.89 for the raw food eaters, 1.84 for the vegan men, but then omnivores had 2.15. Niacin, 23.3 for the raw food eaters, 14.6 and 18.9 on the omnivores. So once again, I mean, on a lot of these specific nutrients, a raw food diet can be so nutrient dense you could really hit a lot of the numbers, but there can be some that can be challenging. So I'm not going to go over all these numbers because you're going to get bored. So anyways, I'll go over B6, vitamin C, vitamin E and K, and pantothenic acid were all better in the raw food eaters than the vegans or omnivores, and in one case the vitamin K was tied with the vegan men. But then if we get down to some of the minerals, like potassium, the potassium was 6.69 in the raw food eaters, 4.79 in the vegan men, and 3.36 in the omnivore men. So I mean, in many cases, the omnivorous men were really not getting as high levels of certain nutrients as the raw food eaters that were kicking butt on a lot of them. Except this one here, calcium. You would think, raw food eaters are eating their leafy greens or eating some, nuts and seeds, are getting enough calcium, right? Wrong. That was the interesting thing to me also in this study. The omnivore men had 1179 calcium milligrams per day. The vegan men had 1156, which is pretty close to the omnivore, so that's a good amount of calcium. But the raw food eaters only had 710. So that's a little bit concerning. And once again, I'm talking about mean values, or the values in the study here. Magnesium, a very important component of health, or a very important mineral that does so many things in our bodies. Omnivore men 486, vegan men 714, and the raw food eaters, to rule them all, at 742. Zinc, on the day that these food journals were kept, raw food eaters had 13.1 zinc, vegan men had 11.8, and the omnivores had 15.3. That being said, in the blood testing, it showed that the raw food eaters were lower in zinc. So this may be something you may want to look at. Include zinc-rich foods on a regular basis. I include some kind of seeds, usually like pumpkin seeds or watermelon seeds, things like that for zinc. Also very interesting, another nutrient that can be deficient on a raw food diet, iodine, right? The omnivores had 165 of iodine, the vegans had 88, and the raw food eaters had 78.9, so they were the lowest. So you definitely want to get some iodine. We'll discuss this in a little bit. And then iron, the omnivores had 14.8, the vegan men had 25.0, and the raw food eaters had 22.4. That being said, they're not differentiating between heme iron and non-heme iron, and if the omnivores had 14.8, it could be heme iron. That's maybe more readily absorbable, but also could be more problematic than the vegans or the raw food eaters. So yeah, that shows basically the nutrients that they ate, but the back of this is more interesting. Once again, I'm covering the men only, and that covers how many grams of food did they eat of certain food categories. So let's go over. The raw food men had, once again, this is the median value, 566 grams of raw vegetables a day. So that's maybe like 1.25 pounds of vegetables. To me, personally, that's too low. Some of the values that they had that were low could have been totally wiped out by including more vegetables in their diet. My goal every day is to eat 2 pounds of leafy greens a day. So that'd be like 900 grams of leafy greens, and then I still eat another pound or 2 of vegetables as well. So I really want you guys, if you guys don't want to be deficient, to crank up your vegetable consumption. So many raw vegans that I see eat a lot of fruit and they don't eat enough vegetables, right? Moving down, this is quite interesting to me. So they go into like cabbage family of plants, which contain many different valuable properties, including isothiocyanates. They're anti-cancer, have some really beneficial properties. How many grams per day did the raw food men eat? 8.8. Many of them ate 0. Some of them ate 0, which to me is insane, because that should definitely make up part of your vegetable intake of cabbage family or cruciferous family plants. They're quite healing. That being said, some camps in raw foods believe that those vegetables are toxic and you shouldn't eat them. So maybe there's a lot of those people that have that, in my opinion, mistaken belief that they're bad for you, when I believe, and the science shows, that they can be quite healthy for you. Next is mushrooms, and they basically ate 0 grams of mushrooms a day. I think that if your long-term health is important to you, I think mushrooms should be eaten on your raw vegan diet. You could eat a certain amount of mushrooms raw, and certain kinds of mushrooms raw. Other mushrooms raw could kill you. I do heat process my mushrooms for a very short time. Also, they talked about germinated cereals and legumes on the raw food eaters in this study's diet. Once again, 0 grams. is the mean, although there's like maybe a few people that may have eaten some germinated cereals or legumes, grains or legumes. And you know, once again, if you guys want to stay raw, you want to balance out your diet, eat some more sprouted grains and legumes. So once again, spread out your calorie sources in more than just the fruit and vegetable and nut and seed categories. Very important. This is another very interesting food group, seaweed algae. Once again, you're going to crank up your protein content without cranking up the calories, and also get a lot of different vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients in you. You should eat more seaweed and algae, especially for some of the unique polysaccharide fibers in the seaweeds. And you know, the raw food eaters in this, once again, the median was 0, although somebody in the study was eating a little bit, maybe 1 gram a day. And you know, I do eat small amounts of seaweeds on a regular basis myself, and I would encourage the consumption. Of course, now we get down to the fresh fruit category. How many grams a day? Fresh fruit category, 906 grams a day. So that's almost around 2 pounds basically of fruit a day. So they're eating 2 pounds of fruit a day, maybe like 1.25 pounds of vegetables a day. Once again, median scores, because some of the men were eating up to 1,268. Once again, that's a median, and the range was 578 to 1,268 on the fresh fruit. This is where it gets interesting. The dried fruits, right? The dried fruit, the median was 38, and some raw food eaters ate 0, but then the highest raw food eater ate almost 150 grams of dried fruit a day. Eating 150 grams of dried fruit a day, I believe, is not optimal, because once again, you're now eating more dried fruit and you're going to eat less of fresh fruit or vegetables or other food categories. So if you guys are eating lots of dried fruit, I mean, I did that when I started in raw foods when I was new, and I mean, dried fruit tastes amazing. I'm not going to deny that. But you guys, for your health, need to just shy away from that. You really amp up and get a lot more sugars in you. And yes, you get some calories too, and dried fruit's healthier than a lot of things out there, but once again, you want to, limit the amount of dried fruit, in my personal opinion, for long-term health. Next food group was fruit juice. So the mean of fruit juice was 19.2. Some had 0, and one person had up to 80 grams a day of the fruit juice. You know, I think they should have had a category for vegetable juice. I mean, vegetable juice, in my opinion, is a lot more important than fruit juice. Fruit juice is good if you just want to get calories and calories on the go, but I would encourage you guys just to grab some fresh fruit on the go and eat the fruit instead. I drink some fruit juice here and there. If I got fruits that are not tasting so good, they're not so sweet, I'll juice them with other vegetables. So next up is nuts and seeds, and 64.8 was the median of the nuts and seeds for the raw food eaters. And compare that to the vegans, which ate like 20.3, or the omnivores that ate 0.7. I mean, that's definitely not enough nuts and seeds. But 64.8 as the median. One person on the study had almost 220 grams of nuts and seeds a day, which is, to me, in my opinion, getting to be, a lot. But once again, if you're really restricting the categories of food you're eating, you've got to get your calories somewhere, and eating nut calories and dried fruit calories are very easy, satiating, satisfying, and taste delicious. But once again, you're doing that at the sacrifice of what? Not eating enough vegetables, or not eating any seaweed and algae, or sprouted and germinated cereals and legumes. So yeah, I mean, that's the basis of what the raw food eaters were eating. They also segregated out, heat processed vegetables for the omnivore and vegan group, which is kind of interesting. And obviously on the raw food group, there's 0 cooked vegetables, cooked legumes, no bread, and no pasta, rice, or grains. So let's check it out. The vegan men, how are the vegan men eating in this study? So on raw vegetables, the vegan men ate 119 grams of raw vegetables, but then they ate 178 grams of cooked vegetables, which in my opinion is still too low, whereas the raw food eaters still kicked ass because they had 566 grams, which still beats the vegan men's amount of vegetable consumption. The one thing that I know for sure is that we want to really try to eat more vegetables, because there's lots of benefits to vegetables, and whether you're vegan, omnivore, or otherwise, you're probably not eating enough vegetables, because in my opinion, even the raw food eaters in this, we're not eating enough vegetables either. The omnivores are even, dismal. The raw vegetables ate were 81 grams, and the cooked vegetables was 91 grams, which is just a pittance. And you could be a healthy omnivore, man, but you got to crank up your whole foods consumption, especially your vegetables, right? And I mean, I'm not really going to get into anything else, but yeah, it's very interesting to see what the raw food eaters ate. Oh, and I do want to comment on the women. So the women and the raw food eaters ate only 310 grams of vegetables a day, which is like really not enough. And then, but check this out. They only ate 409 fruit grams. So like that's like less than a pound of fruit and less than a pound of vegetables. So what the heck? Where are they getting their calories from, right? Like that's insane to me. So like to me, they're like massively under eating. I mean, they ate, you know, nuts and seeds and fruit juice and dried fruits also. But like, and they ate mushrooms actually, and actually a little bit more seaweed than the men as the mean. But like to me, that's like really under eating, so I don't know if they have like eating disorders or what's going on with them, because that just seems really low, right? Once again, they weren't even eating 1 pound of fruits a day and under 1 pound of vegetables a day. So I don't know what was up with that. That's why I really didn't want to cover their data too much in this study. Just it seemed something was going on, and the sample size was only 5, whereas the sample size on the men for the raw food eaters was 10. All right, so that's the summary of the nutritional intake and biomarker status in strict raw food eaters. And here's the takeaway, guys. You know, whatever diet you guys are on, it can be healthy or not depending on the label of your diet, right? You could have a very unhealthy vegan diet and eat vegan processed foods and junk foods, and your blood marker is going to be crap. You could be a whole food plant-based vegan that eats more leafy greens, whether they're raw and cooked, than a raw food eater, right? You could have a greater diversity of other foods besides just overeating fruit, because now you're not limiting yourself. You can be quite healthy. And finally, of course, being raw vegan, you can be quite healthy at being raw vegan if you don't limit yourself too much. You don't eat enough fruit, you eat a lot of vegetables, and you try to diversify your diet. As evidenced by this study, a lot of your nutrient intakes can easily be met and exceed even vegan or omnivorous eaters, but you gotta be careful. You gotta make sure you fill in for some of the inadequacies that are inherent in a raw vegan diet, and watch out for those pitfalls such as eating too much fruit, not eating enough vegetables, eating too much fat, eating extra caloric rich foods like fruit juice and extra nuts and seeds. That being said, you wanna have an appropriate amount of these things. Take a vitamin B12 supplement, a vitamin D supplement, make sure you get enough zinc, right? And you could be actually quite healthy. So, you know, this is what I'm all for. I'm all for people eating more fresh fruits and fresh vegetables. If getting you to cook some vegetables gets you to eat more of them and maybe displace some fruit, I'm in favor of that. I think vegans should eat a lot more raw foods. Maybe they don't have to classify themselves as a raw food vegan, but eat a lot more fresh vegetables and enough fruits in their diets. And, you know, more concerning than that to me is the processing method. This study did not cover processing methods, and there are processing methods. Every processing method, whether you're blending in a Vitamix, using a high-speed or slow juicer or a vacuum blender or an air fryer or just a traditional fryer in oil or a pressure cooker or steaming or microwaving or boiling your food, will affect the nutrient content. So I encourage you guys, I have videos on this where I talk about the specific methods you use to process your food will determine the toxicity in the food, like by creating toxins or, you know, by lowering phytonutrients and oxidizing nutrients and creating more enzymatic reactions, right? So these are critical. So I'll sum it up by saying this. We want to process our food as minimally as possible, right? The best methods to process your food, in my opinion, are number 1, chew them with our teeth. That's the best way. I'm not going to say anything other than that. I will say that for some people, it may be really good to use a slow juicer, not a high-speed juicer. Slow juicer can maximize the amount of nutrients and basically make it a lot easier to digest and absorb nutrients from things like leafy greens that are not too easy to eat or absorb, especially if you have a dysfunctional, you know, gut. In addition, I recommend vacuum blending over traditional blending that can destroy up to 3 times more polyphenols and oxygen-sensitive nutrients as proven by science. Also gives you a better texture, better flavor, and better storage capabilities, better color retention over time, right? And these are like little small things you could do by just getting a vacuum blender or getting an attachment for your Vitamix to do vacuum blending. Use a slow juicer. Sell your Breville juicer, that high-speed juicer. Get a slow juicer. You're gonna ramp up the nutrition you guys are getting in. And if you guys want to heat process your food, do it like I do it. Yes, I'm a raw foodist and my stove is disconnected, but I own an Instant Pot that I cook and I heat process my food in, so the food never gets above like 248 degrees or something like that, so I don't create the high levels of toxins that can be made at higher temperatures when you're not cooking in water, right? And cook for the shortest amount of time possible. And that's my summary. That's what I'm going to tell you guys. I want you guys, once again, expand the varieties of foods you eat. That's the most important thing as a raw vegan, and especially supplement the vitamins and nutrients in question. Take a look into complement supplements. I like those a lot. They have the EPA, DHA, B12, vitamin D, and some of the minerals that can be deficient in a raw vegan diet, even shown in this published paper. And that could make you healthier in the end. And that's why I make these videos for you guys. If you guys enjoyed this episode where I went over the published study on the raw food vegans and sharing my opinions on this topic, give this video a big thumbs up. Also, more importantly, share this with others so that other people could learn the pitfalls of the raw vegan diet and actually how it can be superior to even a vegan and omnivorous diet in some areas, but maybe not as good as others, but you can fill that in and make it even better. So share this video with others so that they could hopefully start eating more raw foods and get their raw food diet dialed in so that they could be healthy in the long term. And I won't see another why I'm no longer raw vegan video on YouTube. Also, be sure to click that subscribe button right down below so you don't miss out on my new and upcoming episodes that are coming out every 5 to 7 days. You never know show up what new published study I'll be going over or information I'll be sharing with you guys that can enrich your guys' lives and make you guys healthy in the long run if you adopt and use the knowledge that I'm sharing with you guys. Make sure you click the bell so you get notified as many videos found. And finally, be sure to check my past episodes. My past episodes are wealth of knowledge, over 600 episodes at this time, to teach you guys all about how I live my raw foods diet, especially with whiteboards, going over some of the studies so that you guys can maybe get a better education about raw foods and eating it healthily than you will on other channels that may not go over some of the science. So with that, my name is John Kohler with okraw.com. We'll see you next time, and until then, remember, keep eating your fresh fruits and vegetables. They're always the best.